only have about 200 slides. So we're just gonna, I'm sure you guys are not that interested in coffee. So, okay, we're gonna have a very, special kind of talk. Let's see if it hits or not. You can tell me. But real quick, I feel like I kind of fucked up last year. I came up here with a message of hope. I had this great solution to share with all of you to all of our problems. And just as I was explaining how bad the situation was that we needed to solve, I ran out of time. So I just feel like people kind of got the wrong impression. Yeah. I'm really not sure why. Like, I was just trying to tell you guys how I was seeing the situation, and it just, it didn't land. So I feel like I owe you all, after putting you through that kind of like a depressive episode, for those of you that are not on the same medications than I am, I feel like I've got to kind of lift you all up again. So I should give you something of disproportionate value to me. And in order to do that, I need something from you guys. So I have a certain style of exposition some of you may be familiar with. I like drawing these like conceptual maps. And the idea is that like I can walk you through how those ideas connect. And by the time we reach the conclusion, what I'm telling you just seems intuitive and self-evident, right? It just kind of flows. And the problem is that shit takes time. So we're going to try something new. We're going to strike a deal. If the slides, there we go. So it's a sort of Faustian bargain of such. That line was supposed to, you folks will suspend your disbelief for the rest of the con, just until Saturday, let's say. And we're going to think as if what I'm about to tell you is a certainty that you're committed to. And if you don't see your place in that new reality, I will publicly retract my statements. I'll say, whatever it is that you've shown me that is the right way to go, I'll go on the podcast, I'll tell everybody I was wrong, and I will, push your line. Deal? Deal? Yeah? All right. So what the fuck is going on? I said that the project of cybersecurity has failed. And I not only said it then, I've said it a couple of times since then. And I was just trying to have my like Jeremy Irons margin call moment, right? Or really, I was just kind of bummed out. But I'd like to say that thankfully I was wrong. I'm sure that all comes as a shock to all of you. What I should have said is that this phase of the project of cybersecurity has ended or is coming to an end. If we think of our industry in terms of phases of societal development, then this phase of our project is ending. And just to kind of set us kind of in some bit of perspective, we can say we're past the exploration and development phase. We're past experimentation and prototyping. We're past acceleration and speculation. You might have enjoyed that phase. And I'd say that we're somewhere around this like consolidation and standardization, especially consolidation, not yet standardization, right? And beyond that horizon, you would normally be able to look forward and essentially expect that the next phase is a matter of deployment and scaling things out. Also often referred to as diffusion to the majority, and that's a point that we should, kind of hold on to in the back of our heads. And beyond that, you usually have this idea of maturity and saturation, right? Now we're just talking, the solution has been spread everywhere, and now we're mostly talking about optimization and diminishing returns. And ultimately, you get to this closing, there's a transition, a recomposition, or essentially what we would normally refer to as a paradigm shift. And I hope that we get to go see that phase eventually, but we're not quite there yet. So why talk about this? Well, it's because the ultimate strength of our species has really been the fidelity of our mental representations of the world. And the fact that we can build these amazing models of how the world works, and then we can adapt them as we go. We figure out, that was good enough to get us here, but not good enough to keep going. So what's the next phase? We adapt, we keep moving. It goes into how our brains are formed and whatnot. It's actually quite fascinating. So my growing frustration for the past few years has been coming from trying to process the problem from the bottom up. sort of like trying to understand how these different areas kind of play and like what value they bring. And the lack of perspective has been killing me. I don't know about you guys, but just not knowing kind of how these things connect, not knowing how we're meant to get out of it, it's just a level of frustration that was just kind of eating away at me. So what I wanted to do is to spare you the same anguish and uncertainty, and to essentially share sort of my mental model. And you can see my notes are still in here, but I'm not going to give you that. So if you like it, it's yours. You can take it. You can sissa it. It's all good. So that was our deal, right? The recipe here is relatively simple, and this is sort of the required reading section for all of you who may want to go into this, right? But it's one part systems thinking, and there's this amazing book called Thinking in Systems by Donella Meadows, and she's just this absolutely brilliant exposition of how systems thinking works for people that are not into that kind of thing. We're going to 3 parts, cybernetics, but most importantly, domain expertise and experience are the most important part of this. And I hope that you can see sort of obviously why I'm talking to you about it, because the rest after that is just pure experimentation. So we're developing a sort of new proficiency. And you can do that in situ or in new endeavors. If you guys want to go start new companies, that's fine. If you want to do it in your existing jobs, that's fine. Because the whole point of this is mostly about the learnings, the things that you figure out as you try to fix these problems in this new way are the things that is the value. That is what represents sort of what you're supposed to get. Those are the friends you make along the way, right? Like that. So why do I keep talking about cybernetics? I'm assuming that not a lot of you are familiar with cybernetics. It's actually sort of our forebears, right? It's somewhere in the phase between computers getting created and us getting to this point where like computers are ubiquitous. There was this kind of a lot of very smart people that came together at things like the Macy conference to talk about how we should be using these systems from a more holistic perspective. And that's where we get a lot of concepts that we use on a daily basis. Things like feedback loops, control flow, homeostasis, ecology, sustainability. All those things came from cybernetics. It's just, we kind of turned against the idea of interdisciplinary work. And it's not a thing that got disproven and therefore we don't talk about it anymore. It's not like alchemy. It's more that it just never fit the academic configuration where you'd have hyper-specialization in these organizations. So it just kind of fell out of view. But it's actually quite important because it's the study of mechanisms, of how we do things efficiently, how we get repeatable outcomes that are incentivized naturally by virtue of how the structure works. And funnily enough, the word cybernetics is actually derived from the Greek Kubernetes, which is actually where Kubernetes comes from, but it means steermanship. You know what I'm realizing? All of my hidden slides, the skip slides, are in here. So you're going to see how great my handwriting looks. So the idea being, how do we steer mechanisms towards improved outcomes and disrupt or disincentivize bad outcomes, right? So I'm kind of hoping that we will embrace steermanship. Sorry for the gendered language. I don't really know how to go about that one. Steer-humanship. So what it means is, how do we steer mechanisms towards improved outcomes, disrupt bad ones? And by that, I don't mean management. I'm not trying to sell you on some like bullshit career talk about how you all need to become people managers. I think if you like it and you're good at it, do it. If you don't. I'm not, obviously. So the whole point is that we kind of need to switch modalities to match the new phase of our collective project. And that new modality is entirely, remember what we said, right? We're getting to the notion of like standardization and then hopefully scaling out. So that new modality is about orchestrating resources to scale out effective defense. I told you that I would lend you sort of my mental model in all of this, and all of it is sort of predicated on this idea that we're kind of living in the decay of 20th century concepts. And you can see that throughout, right? Like Bretton Woods doesn't really apply anymore. Or international law is not a thing anymore. Like we're just kind of like discarding things that are like, it doesn't quite fit anymore, right? Yeah. It's cool. And really, we're going to treat that actually as a good thing for the purposes of our conversation, because whenever there's a disparity in the perception of value of something and the effort that it takes to produce, that's usually what would be referred to as an arbitrage opportunity. In this case, I will refer to it as a vibitrage opportunity. And that is what is going to define, what is defining everything in the past year and probably for the next few years are sort of the ability to extract value from that disparity. Until we figure out where the hell we're supposed to go, in the meantime, you say, hey, we used to pay X amount to have somebody do our books. Somebody in the meantime figures out that they can Claude code their way to doing taxes at like 10 times the speed that they used to for a third of the cost. The value extracted until the market catches up is your arbitrage opportunity. That's how hedge funds work and high frequency trading and all that kind of, nonsense. So we want to be able to systematically leverage that in our favor. And for that, I think we kind of need to come up with our own sort of a different school of thought. And this is where my pretentious necessity to like name everything kind of comes in. But I do think that there's a point to it. And I think that it kind of highlights why this community in particular matters for this effort. So if we look at it as sort of like this notion of dyadic cybernetics, right? The idea that you have two things sort of, well, we'll talk it through, right? What we want to do is a study of mechanisms for systems that leverage multiple evaluators. And by an evaluator, I'm talking about somebody, like this is an abstraction, right? Come with me on this. Just give me, you said you would. So the idea is an evaluator is a supplier of evaluative power. And some of you have heard me use this phrase quite a bit over the past year. But I think you'll see why you're all kind of perfect for this. Because how familiar is this scenario, right? When you look at a scenario with an attacker and a defender arrayed against each other in an information asymmetrical space, right? They know something about you, you know something about them. It's different. You don't have like a nice complete picture of what's going on. Presumably there's a perimeter, as you know, old and abstruse as that idea might be now. The attacker has an external awareness of the systems involved in that perimeter or whatever circuit is we want to build. And there's an internal attempt to sort of discern motivations and TTPs, threat intel, whatever blue teaming you want to think about. A different internal awareness of the perimeter and the assets, right? Like we think of it as a certain thing. They think of it as a different thing. And there's also an effort to sort of establish, across those assets, a sort of monitoring and feedback mechanisms. So all of that is essentially just walking through a cybernetics diagram of what a system looks like. The term system being something else, right? The composite elements, the structure that puts them together, how information flows in and out of that, right? That is a fairly familiar scenario for us. We're just not used to putting it in those terms. So what has caused us to fail, quote unquote fail? And I'm sort of rushing through it. But really what has caused us to fail more than anything else is complexity. One of the main topics in cybernetics is how to deal with variation and variability. And I think we have, up to this point, been very enamored with complexity. As a complexity fetishist myself, who am I to cast stones? But the problem with complexity is that it introduces nonlinear effects. And in this case, it introduces nonlinear effects against us. When every place we go to and every system we work on is a different configuration, a different set of systems, a different type of software, a different software stack, all those like really cute GNU Linux era, bike shed arguments suddenly become genuine limitations of the ability to be able to regulate and manage these systems. The funny thing is when you look at cybernetics, and this is why I'm trying to drag you into this thing. It sort of feels archaic, but it really isn't. They do have a solution for problems like this. Like, it is actually very clear about, like, if you're dealing with this trap, this is the kind of thing that you want to incentivize in order to fix it. And the solution, as I'd already mentioned, right, sort of, is standardization. So you said you would come with me on this, right? Can we think about what this job would look like if we knew that every time we walked into an enterprise, their software stack is X, Y, and Z. It uses these systems. It's updated to this type of software, and it's compatible and, with these sorts of levers that we can pull and push. In the absence of that, guys, like, we're not going anywhere. Like, it's all going to keep being artisanal, farm to table defense, right? The cost of that is, so we need to think of standardization as a prerequisite for diffusion to the majority. And that really should be our goal walking into this phase, is we need to get through diffusion of the majority as quickly as possible so that we can actually see what the next level of innovation is that we're supposed to be bringing to bear that isn't RSA level bullshit, right? So cybernetics clearly spells out how to solve this and a variety of other quote-unquote intractable situations in cybersecurity. What traditional cybernetics does not have is actually a way to account for the mechanization of evaluative power. Remember what we said, right? Like, we're the evaluators, the intelligence, the essentially intelligent beings engaged in that are the sole suppliers of evaluative power up to this point. And in the system we discussed, any point for evaluation, therefore, is human limited. That is your true throughput of what you can manage. So with humans as the sole suppliers of evaluative power, that is our limit. And that is reflected in computer science. If you guys kind of think back and reframe some of these things, any control flow mechanism in comp sci basically ends at the limits of determinism up until this point. It's essentially this hard limitation that is being system imposed, is imposed from the outside, is the availability and throughput of human attention. So a system-supplied limitation in our ability to scale our efforts is going to choke us forever. But the truth is that changed in October 2022, right? With the beta introduction of ChatGPT and the beginning of all this sort of LLM madness. And this is not where I drag you into the hype cycle itself. I want to cut through it. I think LLMs are not being properly described for any of us. So they don't really make sense. Fuck all this AGI nonsense. That does not make any sense whatsoever, period. These are lossy compression representations of human knowledge. That's it. Just think of them as lossy compression. That's it. What it saw before, it has compressed to some degree. It can, to some degree, leverage what it has seen. What it has not seen before, it will not be able to leverage. And whatever quality of the compression is effectively where you get your hallucinations, where you get your ability to sort of represent something properly. That is it. Don't buy into the VC hype bullshit. So with the introduction of effectively the commoditization of evaluative power, we can now talk about all the problems that we've been working on in a new framing, which is what happens when you have a second supplier of evaluative power. And that's where we get into this notion of, this mismatch in perception and value assignation. There's a perception that there's still a scarcity of evaluative power. There's still a scarcity of talent, of, the people in this room, because there are still just as few of us doing this job as there were 6 months ago or before the National Cyber Strategy or before any attempts at scaling up the industry, even though we can't train people, we can't educate them, we can't. So this is our ultimate arbitrage opportunity. The truth is that the return on investment on human-supplied evaluative power is abysmal. Think about how specialized the talent is in this room, and all of you still have to, sleep, shower, go do your taxes, take care of your children, do all these things that are not necessarily fitting of the greatest suppliers of the relevant knowledge that we need to be working on this. And that hasn't changed, right? So if you still look at it, right, the physics of our ability to evaluate things as humans are still the same. They're limited in supply, they're inconsistent in their output. Sometimes you say smart things, sometimes you don't. They're variable in their availability. Sometimes you sleep. I don't know why. Non-standardized in its capacity. We don't have the same education. We don't have the same experience of the world. We see things differently regardless, human to human. It's expensive. Feeding, clothing. I mean, look at just what it takes for Courtney to be able to house us here. And yet it's incredibly adaptable and dazzling in its brilliance. So I'm not telling any of you that we're out. I'm kind of hoping we will segment and sort of pull away to what things we want to apply ourselves to. So what about this second supplier? Well, when it comes to artificial evaluative power, it's practically unlimited in supply. It can be made consistent in its output. It's relatively, predictable in some of the output, but it's definitely predictable in its availability. For the most part, right? You don't look at OpenAI servers going up and down. It's standardized in its capacity, and it's cheap and getting cheaper. That is what that market is going to continue to do, is keep driving that value down. At the same time, it's not as adaptable, it's not as capable, but it is capable on demand. So if we can sort of understand the physics of it and the physics of how different it is, we should be able, essentially, to discuss this question. What is the return on investment on artificial evaluative power, particularly when it comes to security? That is what we need to determine. That is actually the question that I've been sort of from the bottom up trying to get to, until the question presents itself. The solution simply, and I don't want to get too into the terminology, is essentially we keep thinking about agonistic systems. We are sort of the defenders here. The attacker is over there, and we're in this sort of warring faction, one and the other. And most of the things we design and work on are about leveraging information asymmetry in some way or another in that system. I think the better thing for us to do now is to focus entirely on what synergistic configurations look like, which is to say, we are the defenders as an intelligence supplier here. There is another supplier of intelligence that is on our side. How do we efficiently, effectively, reliably leverage that? For what problems do we actually need to engage the people in this room versus what problems are now effectively cheap and easy and manageable and tractable on the basis of that? And I think that the standard terminology these days is co-intelligence, but there's so much bullshit around all this stuff that it's just you can't just borrow those terms whole cloth. So why am I talking to you about this? And I'm starting to dig into some of the coffee breaks, so let me be quick. Is it to trade for your soul? Is that what this sort of bargain is, right? I don't think that's what, I don't have value for souls. I don't really know what to do with them. It could be for clout, but I'm on LinkedIn now, so clearly that went out the window. So this is actually my attempt at an act of leverage into the system. I'm injecting something of value to me, which is this way of viewing the world that I think is proving quite effective at a time of chaos. And I expect something in return for doing so, which is I will tell you how to think through this chaos and this madness and the job cuts and the bullshit and the companies, firing 10,000 people the same day they hire 10,000 people and all that kind of shit that just makes the world not make sense anymore. And in turn, you'll tell me how we fix this problem. That is cybersecurity, right? So, well, how much time do you want to spare me, Ryan? 0? 2? Okay. So we are in a negotiation as what kind of good devil would I be if I didn't sort of try to break down your moral fiber to some degree? What I ask of you is to reject whatever slave morality we have developed and adopted as workers in the InfoSec space. Stop doing favors for trillion-dollar companies. Fucking please. Enough. Look, with Mark Spencer's example from earlier, save your charity for those in need. There are people who do need it. It's not those fucking companies. It's important right now because we're in this, part of the criticality of this phase is the value discovery. People are trying to figure out what the actual value of what we do, what we sell, what we can extract from willing buyers is. And we're kind of devaluing what we bring to the table every time we make it just seem like, well, solutions will just present themselves. Global crisis happened. Global crisis fixed itself. And you go, well, there's not a whole lot of, we didn't need to do anything. The system just sort of heals. Yeah, sure. Same as like the open source myth, right? It just maintains itself. So what is it that we're bringing to the table? Just to put it very clearly, right? It's an intuitive awareness of the sweat and effort that it actually takes to produce cybersecurity outcomes. Note what I just said, outcomes, not cybersecurity products, not what did it take to make the report or what did it take to sell the little widget and the module and the RSS feed. Those are the things that the used car salesmen have saddled us with as product categories. But that's not actually, obviously that shit's only becoming compliance fodder. So, that's not what it is. And you guys know which of those things takes a whole lot of effort to accomplish, and which of those you could scratch out in 2 hours if you really wanted to, which means which of those you could probably repeatedly, reliably, effectively get a machine to make now. So you hold the ultimate keys to sort of leveraging this disparity in value assignment. And that doesn't, right now, your employers might mean that means they know, but no, they don't. You do. Keep that in mind. The important thing here is that the developers of these technologies are way too AGI-pilled to know what to do with the tech. So, which is why we keep hearing these conversations like, well, we don't know what's going to get disrupted. We don't know how this technology can be used. Yeah, they don't fucking know. We can know. We're the ones that have been producing this stuff in security. So why does AI matter so much? It's like, frankly, because it actually changes the rules of the game. And we have all been playing this game for long enough where we're all getting super disheartened and just say, well, this is the way it goes. That's just what you do. You put out some IOCs and you hope that things go well. It's like, yeah, well, that game was clearly not going well for us. So it's time, let's embrace the ability to flip the fucking tape, right? MITRE's gone. Why not? And the whole point of it is that we can actually leverage that to change the asymmetry in multiple directions and cardinalities, the speed of things, the cost of things, what gets sent to whom, where, and why. So I'll leave you with a little bit of food for thought because I'm already way over time. So, sorry? Yeah? Oh, okay. So one of the things that we've been talking about recently is Dave Vitale put out Aardvark. Well, he produced it. He's not put it out. We can't touch it, but they have it. One of the interesting things that Aardvark does as sort of like this bug finding model at OpenAI is they've been able to start analyzing commits in open source repositories for bugs, which means that to whatever extent Aardvark is accurate, we don't know. Assuming that it is accurate, you can actually look at the amount of bugs introduced by commits into a code base. So if I tell you, and really if Dave Vitale tells us, that bugs are actually introduced at a near steady rate of 1% to 2% of commits into any actively maintained code base, you can effectively start to measure a sense of software entropy. At what rate are our software projects essentially disintegrating in front of us? And if there is no counter force that's playing with that, how do we expect these things to somehow be manageable, stable? Oh, because we're all working on it, it's getting better? Apparently not. So what I invite you to do is take some of those things and ask, if that is readily available to me and it's only going to get better and it's only going to get cheaper, what does it look like to expand our area of impact, expand our scope of action, and determine a new cost factor altogether? And for that, you can have some nice approximations, right? What I call the Aschenbrenner reduction is essentially, they say if humans think at 100 tokens per minute, they use that. Obviously, 100 tokens per minute doesn't mean shit, and there's no reason why you would think of it that way. But if you kind of give them that, you can actually sit down and start to do the math of what it takes to supposedly produce an equivalent amount of it. Obviously, that's not a good way to look at it because, tokens are thought of as a measure of compute in that, which means that tokens are thought of as a measure of thinking. So let them build these better, cheaper models and think of it as thinking is getting cheaper. We know that there is a quality metric to tokens and thinking that is not being accounted for. It's not simply like to solve a problem, insert 5,000 tokens into this bucket, problem solved. But they think of it that way because they sell tokens. That's the fucking business model now. So that's it. We obviously are not going to think of it that way. That's why we have folks like Dreadnought, self-strikes. That's why we have folks focusing on evals and SecBench and the idea that we're going to have to think of a way to evaluate that output. So what I give you now is just an edict and a freedom to say, stop protecting your industry. We actually need to be the ones focusing on leveraging this shit show of an industry that we're stuck in right now. And the way to start it is by literally looking for the ways to kill the product categories that we've been saddled with. Whatever it is, look, we sell EDR. If there's a better thing out there, I'd rather we be the ones to discover it. You guys, incident response, is that really what makes sense anymore? To have an engagement, to have people show up? Why? Do we need the people to go there at all? Like, those are the questions that we need to answer ourselves. No one else is going to do it. So, I won't say happy hunting anymore. Just go to destroy this thing in order to save it. So, with that, enjoy your coffee, and thank you.